Under maritime law at the time, anyone salvaging a ship could expect a substantial share of the combined value of the rescued vessel and cargo. The de Gratia's Captain Morehouse, believing the missing crew to have panicked after thinking their vessel was sinking, decided to split his own crew between the de Gratia and the Mary Celeste and proceed to Gibraltar. DeVoe, along with 2 other seamen, Augustus Anderson and Charles Lund, had the Mary Celeste ready to sail within 2 days, with DeVoe having to rely on the ship's last remaining pump to deal with the water in the hold. Together, the Mary Celeste and de Gratia set sail, traveling about 600 miles or 1,100 kilometers to Gibraltar, hoping to collect the salvage payment from the ship's insurers. It was a slow-going and difficult journey, but both ships eventually reached port by December 12, 1872. There, a British Vice Admiralty court convened a salvage hearing, which is usually limited to determining whether the salvagers, in this case the de Gratia crewmen, were entitled to payment from the ship's insurers. The Gibraltar hearings began on December 17, 1872, and lasted until March 1873. Edward Joseph Baumgartner was the registrar of the Admiralty Court, and Frederick Solly Flood was the Attorney General for Gibraltar. The judge was James Cochrane, and the lawyer representing de Gratia was Henry Peter Pisani. At the inquiry, the ship's main owner, James Henry Winchester, gave evidence that the captain was a courageous officer who would not desert his ship except under the direst of circumstances. Frederick Solly Flood, the Attorney General for Gibraltar, was certain that the abandonment of Mary Celeste could only be as a result of murder and piracy, and was, as some have said, overly determined to prove it. He had the ship thoroughly investigated by Shipping Inspector John Austin and diver Ricardo Portunato for signs of criminal activity. They noted the same saber slash that was believed to have been discovered on the deck, as well as what Flood claimed were traces of blood. The possible bloodstains found on the captain's sword as well as on the deck were later debunked. De Gratia's first mate, Oliver DeVoe, said that he did not see any blood anywhere, stating that the sword was actually rusty. Court records state that the blade had been cleaned with lemon, and the result was iron citrate, a substance corrosive to metal, not dried blood. The stains on the deck were also found to be rust-related, and even the supposed saber slash found on the wood was explained by natural cracks created by the movement of the ship. Still, the court's officers considered various theories of foul play, including mutiny by the Mary Celeste crew and high seas robbery by Riffian pirates from Morocco. Natural disasters were also suggested. The fact that the crew of the de Gratia stood to gain financially from the disappearance of everyone aboard the Mary Celeste raised some alarm bells for concerns of insurance fraud. But after over 3 months of investigations, the court found no evidence of either piracy, natural disasters, or foul play. Even so, the de Gratia received only 1/6 of the Mary Celeste's $46,000 insurance policy. The court case ended without any clear determination of what had happened to the crew of the Mary Celeste that began the journey from New York that November 7th. The Mary Celeste herself was then sailed to Genoa and delivered her cargo without further incident. Following the strange disappearance of the crew, the Mary Celeste was recommissioned, but continued to be linked with suspicious deaths and misfortune. She sailed under different owners for 12 years. Her career, however, came to a sudden end in the Caribbean on January 3, 1885, when her last captain, Captain G.C. Parker, loaded her with a cargo of cheap rubber boots and cat food as part of an actual insurance fraud scheme. He then went on to deliberately run the Mary Celeste aground on the Rochaloy Reef off the coast of Haiti. However, she ultimately failed to sink. The skipper then attempted to file an exorbitant insurance claim for an exotic cargo that never existed. After insurance inspectors discovered the ship's actual cargo, the captain and his first mate were convicted on charges of barratry, an unlawful act of fraudulent breach of duty by a ship's master or crew that injures the interests of the owners of the ship or her cargo. Parker then died soon after. The Mary Celeste, however, was damaged beyond repair, and she was left to deteriorate on the reef. As for those that the 1872 crew left behind, there were many family members and loved ones that would never see their fathers, sons, and brothers again. Most notable among them was Arthur Briggs, the only surviving child of Captain Briggs and Sarah Elizabeth Cobb. Having stayed with his grandmother to attend school, he was spared the fate of his parents and baby sister. He was later a ward of a paternal uncle, and eventually married Margaret Hovey Holmes. He became a commercial bookkeeper for a coal company, and his wife, Margaret, was a public school teacher. Both had 2 sons together before Arthur died in 1931 at the age of 66, almost 30 years older than his father would have been when he met his own unknown and untimely end in 1872. The mystery of the Mary Celeste might have faded into obscurity were it not for a man by the name of Arthur Conan Doyle. At the time, he was struggling to establish himself as a writer, prior to creating his most famous work, Sherlock Holmes. In 1884, Conan Doyle published a sensationalized account of the abandoning of the Mary Celeste 12 years after the event, under the title J. Habakkuk Jephson's Statement. It was presented as a fictional retelling of the experience from a survivor who didn't exist, speaking to the crew's capture by a vengeful ex-slave. His editor paid him £30 for the story, a respectable sum in 1884. It was then printed in Cornhill magazine and soon set off new waves of public interest, sparking theories about the true fate of the ship's crew. The story of her 1872 abandonment has been recounted and dramatized many times in documentaries, novels, plays, and films, her name becoming a byword for unexplained desertion. Among the more outlandish speculations was the theory that a sea monster like a giant octopus suddenly attacked the ship, taking everyone on board. Others have pointed out that said creature probably wouldn't have taken the ship's navigational instruments as well. There have also been other theories, such as alien abductions and even the mythical forces of the Bermuda Triangle. In the latter case, the ship has been mistaken as being a victim of the Triangle despite having been on the opposite side of the Atlantic when her crew disappeared. Another slightly more realistic theory suggests that the crew members drank the alcohol on board, became intoxicated, and mutinied. This was debunked, however, when it was factored in that the Celeste was carrying denatured alcohol, which is poisonous to drink. Furthermore, Captain Briggs was famous for being an understanding officer, and no crew had ever complained about him. All the sailors aboard the Mary Celeste were also acclaimed by those who knew them to be trustworthy and of good character. The German brothers, Volkert and Baz Lorenzen, were put under suspicion as none of their personal possessions were found on board, but a Lorenzen descendant revealed that the pair had lost their possessions in a shipwreck earlier in 1872 and had no motive to mutiny. One of the early explanations that got quite a bit of traction was that the ship had been attacked by pirates who murdered the crew. However, piracy wasn't particularly common in that part of the world at the time, thanks to a strong British naval presence, and there wasn't any sign of a struggle on the Mary Celeste either. Plus, pirates in general wouldn't just kill the crew, take a boat, and then leave the ship with all of its valuable cargo still on board. Some have also suggested that the crew could have become victims of ergot, the common name for Claviceps purpureae, a sort of fungus that infects bread and provokes an intoxication that could lead to hallucinations. In this case, the sailors may have abandoned ship in the grip of a collective madness. But this does not take into consideration the fact that that same bread was then eaten by sailors of the De Gratia who had no ill effects. Another, more grounded theory asserts that flammable fumes from the cargo of industrial alcohol expanded in the Azores' heat, creating a large but mostly harmless explosion that blew off the main hatch, leaving no signs of fire damage but prompting those aboard to fear an imminent explosion. Though 9 of the 1,701 barrels in the hold were empty, the empty 9 had been recorded as being made of red oak, not white oak like the others. Red oak is known to be more porous and therefore more likely to leak. This also would have made it far easier for fumes to escape. Such a massive explosion could have been triggered by a spark caused when 2 loose barrels rubbed together, or when a careless sailor, pipe in mouth, opened a hatch to ventilate the hold during the long crossing. It is then possible that Briggs ordered a temporary evacuation so that everyone aboard could sail in the lifeboat trailing behind the Mary Celeste while the vapors cleared. Even an experienced captain might choose a temporary evacuation in such a case, especially with his own family at stake. And then, there is one more theory that takes a number of factors into account. Data on water temperatures, wind speeds, and wind directions at the time showed that the Mary Celeste could have definitely sailed herself without a crew from the November 25th position to where De Gratia's crew found her on December 4th. Modern researchers found that prior to the November 25th entry, Briggs was actually 120 miles west of where he thought he was, probably because of an inaccurate chronometer. By the captain's own calculations, he should have sighted land 3 days earlier than he did. The day before he reached the Azores, Briggs changed course and headed north of Santa Maria Island, perhaps seeking haven, as the night before the last entry in the ship's log recorded the Mary Celeste facing rough seas and winds of more than 35 knots. A captain would most likely order a ship abandoned within sight of land. Since Santa Maria was the last piece of land for hundreds of miles, it seemed safe to assume that the Mary Celeste had been abandoned the morning of November 25th, after the last log entry was written. Briggs may have also believed his ship was taking on too much water and was about to sink. On a previous voyage, the Mary Celeste had carried coal. The ship had also been extensively refitted. Coal dust and construction debris could have clogged the ship's pumps, which would explain the disassembled pump found on board. Then there was the sounding rod used to determine the amount of water in the hold, which was discovered on deck, suggesting that it had been used just before the ship was abandoned. With the pump inoperative and a possible inaccurate reading from the sounding rod, Briggs would not have known how much seawater was in the hull, which was too fully packed for him to measure visually. With rising water, intense weather, a possible faulty reading of the sounding rod, an ineffective pump, and not seeing land when he expected to, perhaps Briggs was led to call for the ship to be abandoned. Because the crew didn't take everything they would need to survive in the lifeboat, it is probable that they had intended it as a temporary abandonment. This may be why they apparently tied the lifeboat to the ship rather than trying to row away, only for their sole lifeline to snap free. The worst part is that they would then have to watch their ship, their only hope, sail away without them, not exploding or sinking as they had feared. At some point, stranded and helpless in the vastness of the Atlantic, they would have come to the horrible realization that they had made a terrible mistake. As to what fate befell them out on the open ocean, it's likely that the captain and crew suffered a great deal before they died. They may have had to deal with storms, shark attacks, sunburn and saltwater ulcers, dehydration, starvation, depression, hallucinations, madness, murder, self-murder, and, of course, cannibalism. The scene would have been that much more gruesome with a woman and child on board, especially if everyone blamed the captain for the situation, including the captain himself. What is known for a fact is that if the ship was abandoned inside of Santa Maria Island, the lifeboat's occupants never reached it. They may have gotten close and then wrecked on the rocky shoreline, or they may have drifted out to sea. At the end of the day, one thing is certain. It would not have been a painless death that met the crew of the Mary Celeste, her captain, and his family. And it would not have been a quick one either.